Hello and welcome to Horton Community Farm here in Bradford City Centre. I'm Charlie Gray, I'm a member of the co-op here, and as you can see, this wonderful site is an urban oasis. That's how some people describe it. And I'm here near the entrance on Cecil Avenue. We're on Cecil Avenue allotments and we are a land permaculture centre. And we call ourselves a land permaculture centre for food growing and community resilience. So we do a number of things. We offer education, so outdoor education in forest schools. We offer a space for wildlife, as you can see. We offer therapeutic activities. And for that we have a purpose-built therapy garden with the small polytunnel over there, which has deep raised beds. And we do food growing, so we have a couple of polytunnel frames and hope to recover them at some point, and we grow veg in polycultures with flowers for companion plants, and we have a forest garden which is down the end here. So like I said, we offer education, spaces for wildlife and wildlife friendly gardening, therapy, volunteering. We normally have twice weekly volunteer sessions, and at the moment it is through application. People can apply to be volunteers. We still have a couple of spaces on a Friday available, and last but not least, like I said, food growing. So I'm going to give you a little tour of the space so you can see those different areas, and we'll be focusing on seed and saving seed today. So I thought I'd show you some wildflower seeds. These were collected from actually from some of the beds, but this is a vetch, so it's a very typical wildflower. You can see the little pods. They are actually very like little peas, and they're very good for fixing nitrogen in the soil. So I collected some of these so that we can sow them again next year. So one thing I didn't say is that we started the project about 12 years ago. It was part of Transition Bradford, and people volunteered here. Lots of students from the university and local residents, environmental minded folk got together and started clearing it because most of the site was very overgrown like this. So let's take a walk down to the forest garden and we can see a bit more of the site. We have got hedgehogs here, which is very exciting, and there is a fox's den, and we do see foxes, lots of birds, and I think we've probably seen an increase in butterflies, because we do grow with lots of wildflowers, and we leave edges with brambles and stinging nettles, which are actually a really good habitat for moths and butterflies. You can see the blackberries here. There's usually something to forage. That's one of the butterflies that likes the brambles. So this area here is the forest garden. So you can see here there's trees and then the odd fruit bush, but here we're actually planting up underneath. And so the idea of a forest garden is you've got many layers, with lots of herbs and then even some perennial root vegetables. And the idea is it's perennial, so it'll come back year after year and hopefully be low maintenance. That's the idea. So this is what we call our wildlife corridor, to use an ecological term. But basically the whole site is a really good habitat for wildlife, but the birds and bees particularly love this bit. There's some I think pelargoniums there, and then there's usually comfrey and lots of things that bees like in here. Yeah, the comfreys, there's some comfrey there. It's dying back now, but so we deliberately leave lots of areas for wildlife, as well as sometimes sow wildflower seeds. We're just coming up to what was our polytunnel, but it's still a veg growing area. We tend to grow our veg with flowers as well, so in what you call a polyculture. So as you can see, there's quite a lot of flowers on the right, the yellow flowers, so that's actually a plant just going to seed, but the bees really like that, so at the moment we're not taking it out yet. So I'll show you some of the seeds that we've collected from the site. These are all flowers, so that was the vetch that I showed earlier. That's Calendula, that's a French marigold. So they're both called marigold, but that's pot marigold and that's French marigold. These probably could do with some cleaning. I think they might have got a little bit of mould, so that's something you do have to be careful with seeds. I think the seeds inside are probably okay. So those are corn cockles, and these are wallflowers, and on the end here we've got some knapweed. The seeds are actually these tiny little things in here, the little brush looking things, I think. Oops. And then these are some of the vegetable seeds that I had to hand. So we've got chard and beans and peas and onions. So what I'm going to talk through is some of the things to think about with seed saving. So I'm going to start with the easiest things to save. So let's go and have a look at the peas over here. Sorry, the beans and the peas. Oh, I did already put some there. Okay, so these are French beans. So similar to peas, they're very, very easy to save. So I'm just going to talk through some of the things you have to think about and what makes something easy to save or not. So these are seeds that you can grow as if you're growing them to eat. In fact, you can grow some to eat, and then you just leave the last ones to go to seed. And you can see here how the pod is now starting to bulge, and you can see the shape of the seed. I'm just going to have a little look and see if I can find one which is a bit more advanced. So they're all fairly similar. That one looks... let's see if I can find a drier one. So what you're really looking for, unfortunately, these were planted a little bit late, so I can't show you them when they're fully dry. However, I can show you, these are a little bit small, the seeds. But what you're looking for is something that's really bulging and actually starting to go dry. Ideally you want them actually dry, and if you can rattle them and the beans inside actually move around, that's when you know that they're starting to dry, and you just leave them to get them till they get properly dry on the plant. Okay, so none of these are quite ready, but this one might have some beans that are actually the right size. Yeah, they're still a little bit small, but those could be saved. I mean, you can pick them like this, but they'll just lose a lot of moisture, whereas if you leave them to dry in the pod, they just get to really finish off properly. So the things to consider are, is a plant an annual or a biennial? So we talked about perennial with the forest garden, that means it comes back year after year. If something's an annual, like a bean or a pea, it means it grows and it produces the seed that year. If it's biennial, it means it produces the seed the next year. So that's things like onions, beetroot. So far I've only saved seed from annuals here. So one of the things to consider is whether a plant is what we call self-fertile, and whether it self-pollinates or it's cross-pollinated. So this is a French bean, and that's important because runner beans are different. but the flower is pollinated by itself. It's self-fertile before it opens, and then it will produce the bean. So I'm going to show an example of another plant, the cucurbits, pumpkin, courgette, cucumbers. That family are what we call cross-pollinated. So the pollen from the male flower has to go on the pollen of the female flower, or it has to be received on the stigma of the female flower, and then it's transported into the ovary, and that's how you get your courgette. So I can show you that. There's two different flowers. So here you can see the courgettes, so that's growing nicely. That one has a flower that's more or less dropped off. That one's still got a flower, as has that one. And this one here is the male flower. So it's just got the stem rather than a courgette. You can see a very, very mini courgette there that's growing on the female flower. That's the female flower that's closed up now. And then the courgette's growing. But for it to produce a courgette, the pollen from the male flower has to get onto the stigma in the female flower. And so if you want to save a courgette, because they are, so these are called outbreeders. So the peas and other things are called inbreeders. But an outbreeder needs to, if you want to save the seed, you have to choose the flower and hand pollinate it yourself. So this is a bit more complicated. So that's why I'm not going to focus on it today, but it's worth knowing that, because if you try and save your seed, you will find you'll probably get something quite unusual, and that is why we have so many unusual types of squash as well. Okay, so we can have a quick look at this whilst we're here. So this is a good example of another thing that we need to think about when we're wanting to save seeds. So here we've got some lettuce, and then behind the lettuce we've got Mizuna, this one here with the jagged leaves, and we've got some purple frilly mustard. And the Mizuna and the purple frilly mustard are both going to flower and therefore to seed. So these are actually the seed pods, and because they are in the brassica family, in the cabbage family, they do the same thing. They need pollen from elsewhere, and so they will very easily cross. So again, it's not one of the easiest things to save. And the other thing I wanted to illustrate is that you have to think about space. So this is a quite a small plant, a low plant, but when it produces seed, the seeds come right up here and they bush out. So one of the things you need to think about when saving seed is how much space it's going to take. Okay, another thing to think about, and we'll go and see a couple more plants up here. Yeah, I can show that quite easily. We're going to look at lettuce, which is easy to save, but it is somewhat fiddly. So similar to the Mizuna, the plants we were looking at back there, it gets a lot bigger. So you can see the lettuce was over there, and all of this has come out of one plant or maybe a couple of plants. And so all of these are the flowers, and it's starting to go to seed. They're not dry yet, but I will show an example of seed. There's another plant I know that's a bit further on. But the point is, these tiny little flower heads have the seed inside, so you just leave it to go dry. And lettuces don't cross very easily, so these are one of the easier things to save. There's only two things to consider with lettuce. Is it you have to leave it for quite a long time for all of these flowers to form and then to go dry so that you can collect the seed. And the other thing to consider is that they're very tiny, so a bit fiddly. I will show you some dry seed I've got over there before we go and look at harvesting. some things that are easy to harvest. So should we just grab the lettuce seed? I think I put it down. Yes, here it is. So most of these are relatively easy. Well, that's why we started with these things, because they are generally easy. But once you start looking at things like lettuce or things like carrot, they're more difficult, partly because of the size of the seed. So can you see in there, there's some lettuce seeds? Let me just see if I can get any out whilst I'm on camera. It's a bit fiddly. And actually you might find that there's a lot of dry stuff but not much seed. That's one seed in there. So there's a lot of dry material. There's a few more in there. Whether they're viable or not, I don't know. So that's another thing to think about, is that sometimes you might save seed, but you don't know if it's actually going to work. So because these are so tiny, it's, you know, they may work, but they looked a little bit flimsy to me. I don't know if that's just because I've not actually grown from my own lettuce seed before. But yeah, so some of the bigger ones, what you see is that they also dry out and some can get a bit wrinkly. So in previous years we've saved bean seeds before and they've been really nice and shiny. So I'm just noticing that these are a bit more wrinkly than, you know, I've previously noticed. So whether that is going to affect them, I can't be sure. But yeah, that is something you can do, is you can practice trying to germinate seeds. So laying them on tissue paper and just seeing if they germinate. And if you're concerned, you know, you can always sow them a bit more thickly, but it's worth trying them first. Okay, so we'll just have a look at a couple of things that are really easy to harvest. I'll take my calendula. Right. So somewhere here I did, here's some lettuce seed. Yeah, here. There are some that are dry, so I'm going to come back and harvest some more of these. And we can just have another look, see if we can see any more. But that's one of the things with, these look a bit better. Or at least more abundant, we'll see. There we are. So this, I probably shouldn't just throw them on there, although hopefully we will grow. So this year what I did was a kind of what I like to call a forage bed. So a bed where we had lots of different salads. We had some chard and broad beans and lots of calendula. There were some cornflowers, so different wild flowers amongst the vegetables. It's a little bit bare now, but I'm leaving this to collect seed from. So this is a chard here, and as you can see, this one with the red is getting a bit taller, and then this one with the yellow is really tall, and you can see the flower heads. So these are actually the flowers, and they have tiny little flowers, and they also cross. So I did sow some beetroot along here, so that was probably a bit of a mistake, because it means that I can't save all this chard because it may have crossed, because it's one of the plants that crosses very easily, and with beetroot you have to wait till the second year because it's a biennial. With the chard I don't believe that's the case, but I probably should check that. These are broad beans, and so they're slightly different to the runner beans, because these do cross with other plants, other broad runner beans. So we may save the seeds because we don't have any other runner beans growing. We've got a few winter crops coming, some radishes, hopefully some chard. There's a couple more things that we have saved before. The tomatoes are really behind this year, so unfortunately I don't think we'll even have a crop. But the marigolds have done really well again. This is a Tajitis, so it's a French marigold, and again the seeds are really easy to save. They form inside here. Once the head's dried off, you just break it apart and you can see the seeds. So I can talk a little bit more about the isolation practices. So if you do want to save brassicas, for example, you can either grow one crop, so you might grow just broccoli or just cabbage or radish, whatever it is you want to grow for seed, and then you can be sure that you'll get that variety that you wanted. But if you wanted to grow different things on a larger scale, people use nets and things. They use isolation cages. So a bit like your cages for fruit to stop birds, you stop the insects getting in, and then professionals would then introduce their own insects into the cages to do the pollination. Yeah, so up here we wanted to look at Calendula. So this is one of the flowers we use a lot across the site because it's very useful, very beautiful. It's a great pollinator attractor, and it has some antifungal properties. You can kind of feel it around here. It feels a little bit sticky. It's got a slightly resinous product. And the seeds are very easy to collect. When you see a bunch of seeds that are dry like that, you can see the flower heads forming, the seed heads forming. But once they're dry, they're really easy to collect, and that's why we have loads of it. So we just collect that because it's a really useful plant. So some of the wildflowers are really easy to gather. And should we just have a look at one of the corn? Little treat. I haven't actually dared to look at them yet because I was hoping to have a really good example, and I didn't bring a knife today, but let's have a look at this. I'm hoping it's ready. We shall see. But corn is one of the really interesting ones because it is what we call an outbreeder. It does cross-fertilise, and it's wind pollinated, and it has male and female flowers on the same plant. So you can see here, these are the male flowers, and the female has grown these. That's where the cobs have grown. And so if you have a block, this is a reason that you grow corn in a block, because it's the wind that pollinates, so the wind has to be able to get the pollen from the male to the female flowers. So in the centre of a very large block you might find that they don't cross-pollinate, but on the edges they might well do. So that's why GM corn is such a big problem, because it will go and cross-pollinate your lovely organic crop. And unfortunately you're likely to get sued for doing that, even if it wasn't your fault. Bit of seed politics there for you. Oh, it's not, I would say these aren't entirely ready, so that's a little bit sad, but again, we planted quite a lot of stuff late. But basically if you're growing corn to save the seed, these are the seeds. So then you've got lots to plant next year if you decide not to eat one of the cobs. I'm going to leave the rest, and hopefully we'll at least get a few cobs that will be actually ripe. And one nice fact for you is that this stuff is called corn silk, and it's medicinal. I can't remember what for, but it's used in Mexico and other places. We could also have a little look at some of these. I think they're very small. So yeah, the thing that we are struggling with is a lot of stuff was planted. Oh, there's a big one. Right, so this this is a nice example. We grew these plants. These are tomatillos. There's about 6 of them, and they are grown from seed from one tomatillo last year. So exactly like this, very easy to save, and we haven't grown any other tomatillos, so it shouldn't have crossed. And to be honest, tomatoes and tomatillos also don't generally cross. So I should have brought a knife, but you will see the seeds inside. So this is a good example of what we call wet seed. So inside a tomato, a cucumber, a courgette, the seeds are in a moist environment. So the method for saving seeds from a fruit like this is you squeeze the seed out, and you try to get as much flesh, this stuff, off as you can, and just put the seeds into a jar of water and leave them for a few days to get all the pulp off. I think, to be honest, with the tomatillos I didn't do that. I think I just dried the seed because they don't have so much of the mucilaginous stuff around them like tomatoes do. But with tomatoes you have to put it in water, and well, you don't have to, but one method is to put it in water and allow the liquid to sit for a few days in the jar with the seeds. And it actually smells pretty horrible but by the end of a few days, all of that gloop around the seed will then come off, and you can take the seeds. Sometimes it's useful to have a sieve, and you kind of rub it on the sieve, and then you take the seeds and dry them out, and that's how to save tomato seeds, or in this case tomatillos. Yeah, so they don't cross very much, and they don't take that much extra space, because once a tomato's ready for eating, it only needs a few extra weeks, I would say, or if that. It just needs to be a really nice ripe tomato. I mean, a few things I probably should say is, obviously if you're saving seed, you always want to try and save the best seed, so the best plants, the plants that have done really well. You want to try and follow the processes of drying and labelling, so you don't mix up your seeds, things like that. So I've only sort of briefly covered some of the plant biology, just to help people that might be wanting to save different things. But one of the books I would recommend is, I think it's Back Garden Seed Saving. I forget the actual title, but it's Sue Stickland, and it's an excellent book. And it's got a really useful table at the back of the book that gives number ratings 1 to 4 or 5 of how easy or difficult different things are to save in relation to those categories that I talked about earlier. So whether they're annual, biennial, how much space they need, if you need to isolate them from other crops of the same family, and how easy they are to harvest. So hopefully it's useful, and hopefully more people will be saving seed. There's lots of other resources out there, so yeah, keep saving those seeds.